So you all remember the stories of Johnny Appleseed, right? Johnny, his name was John Chapman, his real name. And what I didn't realize is that Johnny Appleseed went around helping pioneers. And part of it was, what's it called, husbandry or something like that with the trees? Anyway, he was very good with trees and understanding trees. And evidently back in the early to mid 1800s, when pioneers were heading out west from the East Coast, part of what they had to do in developing their land was plant like fruit trees and things. And so Johnny Appleseed was going around planting apple seeds to help the pioneers establish their own land and boundaries and all those kinds of things. And I've heard about Johnny Appleseed forever. And I think I mentioned the other week that I didn't realize. And I know I'm a city boy, and maybe all of you knew this, because all of you are, you know, from the backwoods somewhere and have farmed half your life, okay? So, but I didn't realize that if you plant an apple seed, there's far greater chance of you getting like a crab apple or some disgusting apple than it is actually a good apple. I had no idea that's how it worked. As a matter of fact, back then they would plant trees, apple trees came up, and most of the time those trees weren't edible. I mean, they wouldn't hurt you. They just tasted gross. They were tart or whatever. And so what they would do is they would make hard cider out of it. Did you realize that the average pioneer drank over 36 gallons of hard cider a year? That's why they were so happy. Evidently, the children, they had this thing called cider kin for the kids because they'd water it down. And I'm sure because some water, you know, they would probably put a certain amount of the cider in the water anyway just to make sure it was clean because of bacteria. But that's an interesting stat I had never known. And I was like, well, woo-hoo, cider, you know? But what I found out, and this is what I mentioned the other day, or a few weeks ago, was that in order to have, if you somehow, and somebody clearly, well, unless, I don't know about the Granny Smiths or whatever, but somehow, mysteriously, a Granny Smith grew, right? And they tasted the tree, the fruit from this tree, and it was delicious. And they're a little bit tangy, a little bit tart. You know how Granny Smiths are. They're wonderful, right? I love Granny Smiths. And so they're really good with caramel on it. I don't know. I haven't eaten those in a long time. But anyway. But they found it, and it's like, oh, man, this is great. I have one good tree, right? Now, in order to make any of those other trees good, they have to graft. They take up one of the branches from the Granny Smith, and they graft it into another apple tree when it's young, right? I mean, I guess it could be older too. And I YouTube some of this, and I was watching these farmers, whatever they're called, grafting. And it was fascinating because they would take a very sharp knife or a razor blade and they would cut, and it'd be a very like a pencil-sized branch, and they would slice it diagonally, right? And then they would slice into the diagonal. And they would make it so it separates a little bit, and they would splice the two branches together, and they would tape it with this pruning tape or whatever they call it, grafting tape. And then like 3 weeks later, and it starts to bud. And 6 weeks later, you start seeing these flowers and these leaves, and pretty soon, well, not pretty soon, but months later, they've got like little tiny fruit on it that's actually the good stuff. And it's like, that is. And then I'm like, wow, so is apple trees the only ones? I'm like, no, that's most fruit like that. Like certain fruit, like if you want good cherries, chances are you're not going to get a good cherry unless you get the roots or the grafts from a different cherry tree. I'm like, what? I never heard of such a thing. I had a cherry tree in our backyard growing up. And it was usually worms, quite frankly. Almost always had worms. You'd be like, oh, they're cherries. And you open it up and it's like this thing wiggling inside. It's like, ah. Can we use some pesticides? You know, it's like, no, we're organic. Anyway, so we had organic worms in our cherries every year. Anyway, I'm sure there was another way of doing it that was much better. We just didn't know because we're city people. Anyway, my parents weren't, but I am. I digress. So, And our passage today is a talk about grafting. And so we're going to read some of it, and then I'm going to divulge more information so you'll walk away more intelligent, more educated. Well, not necessarily more intelligent, more educated, and hopefully encouraged and challenged and everything else. Okay, so this is coming from Romans 11. And we've been reading Romans 11, and so this is, we're talking about the grafting, and it says, in verse 17, it says, some natural branches in this tree that was God, well, I'll just read it. Some natural branches from the tree were broken off, and you people, you Gentiles, were grafted in like a wild branch joined to a healthy apple tree. Okay, so in the original it says olive tree, but I figure we don't grow olives, we grow apples. So that's more appropriate. Now, you share the life that comes from the root. Now, don't become proud because you've been grafted in. You don't support the root supports you. Now, you may say these branches were removed so I could be added, and that may be true, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand only because of faith. So stay humble, not arrogant. If God did not spare the natural branches when they rejected him, don't assume he'll overlook unbelief in anyone else. Notice both God's kindness and his seriousness. He is gracious to those who trust him, but persistent distrust has consequences. Remember that. And those who rejected him turn back in faith. God is able to graft them in again. If God could graft a wild branch into a cultivated tree, he could certainly restore the original branches. Okay. Now, Romans is one of those books that's got a lot of detail. And so I need to try to help explain what all this is. I've changed some of the wording from the original text as it talks about Jews and Gentiles. And so the average person sitting in the pew doesn't really understand what you mean by grafting in the Jews first and then the Gentiles, and it sounds like something that's way out in the Middle East somewhere, okay? Which it was at the time, but now it's worldwide, right? So let's revisit the whole thing. No, biblical history. Now, some people don't necessarily understand the Bible to be historically accurate, and we're not going to go into some big argument and diatribe about that. But biblical history, the way the Bible, the narrative of the Bible, starts out with Adam and Eve, right? If there's any other people out there, the Bible doesn't mention it. So Adam and Eve are the first two humans according to Scripture. Now, Adam and Eve had kids, and from those kids eventually came Noah. And then what happened with Noah? I know you guys know this one. Big boat, big flood, big wipeout, right? So technically, biblical history says in our biblical genealogies, you can just go back to Noah. Because everyone was wiped out except for his family. And he had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Okay? Now, biblical history says that Shem is the father of all the Shemites, or what we call today the Semites, Semitic people, the Jews and the Middle Eastern people, right? That's why we call them Semite. You know, when someone says you're anti-Semitic, not you, but other people, that means you're anti. They specifically mean it usually for Jewish people, but it's actually the Semitic people are all the Middle Eastern people. And then you have Ham, which is the Bible talks about the father of all African people, and then Japheth, which is all Asian and European people. Okay? Again, this is just biblical, the narrative is how it explains it all. So, God chose to use Abraham. He called Abraham out of Ur. And he says, I want you, and your family is now going to be part of this tree. God's the roots, but you're going to be part of this tree that spreads the good news of who I am to the rest of the world. So you're the tree, your family is going to be this tree. So Abraham had Isaac, and then Isaac had Jacob, and then Jacob had the 12 children, right? Now, and so this tree is starting to grow, and all these branches are growing. And some of the branches stop producing any kind of fruit, according to what Romans is saying. And so pretty soon, this branch over here isn't producing, this branch isn't. And so there's a word called pruning. And they start pruning off. It doesn't mean that those people were no longer associated with God in any way. They just aren't, because of their unbelief, they aren't producing fruit. So it doesn't mean like, it's not like gloom and doom. It just means that they are not, in order to keep the tree healthy, right? We have to keep the main line going. So the main line was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Everyone else was welcome to join in. As a matter of fact, when God told Abraham, you need to be a blessing to the rest of the world. I want you and your offspring to be the ones to share the gospel with everybody, the good news of who God is. And there was a lot of them who didn't. And so God, in his plan, grafted in all of, and now everybody's related according to the Bible, right? So it's not like complete foreigners, they're like cousins. Even though the main family wasn't necessarily adhering to what God wanted, he started grafting in all the cousins. And so now we, who come from various European and all those other kinds of, because it's not about blood, right? It has nothing to do with blood. It has to do with our faith. It's always been about faith. It's never been about blood. He just happened to choose a family line to say, please, you guys are the ones I've chosen to continue this, and I'm going to talk to you and on your offspring. So the Bible's full of stories of God speaking to people. I'm part of this family line. That doesn't mean, I don't know who else he may have spoke to. We don't know. But the Bible narrative talks about this line, the Hebrew people, right? And then he grafted in all these cousins from Japheth and Ham and everybody else, You follow me so far? So it's not so much about family, it's more about faith. It's always been about faith. So, but what Paul is trying to help you understand is in order for you in the Old Testament when you followed Yahweh, okay, you became known as a follower of Yahweh, and you were known as like a Hebrew, and the men were circumcised as a sign of the covenant relationship they had with God. Okay, you follow me? Yeah? All right, good. All right, so the sign of the covenant was circumcision, right? All right, I just, listen, we talk about things in the Bible a lot, and people have I never had a clue growing up what it was all about. So I like it when someone explains things to me. So if it's too much mansplaining, I apologize. So we read, and it's talking about this God's chosen people. It doesn't make them somehow more godly or more special. It just is like, for whatever reason, I have no idea why, God chose this one family. This is just the way he did it. And then Christ came, and the incarnation took place. The incarnation is a huge mystery. But we know that before Christ came, it was all, you either had to listen to a prophet, you had to listen to a priest, or you had to listen to a king. If you wanted to talk to God when the temple was built, you had to go to the temple and sacrifice something. You had to make sure that you were purified. Okay? And then we don't have that anymore. We don't need to do that. Christ came, right? He died and rose again. Now, something magical took place, and I use magic loosely. Something incredible took place. When Christ came, he came as God in the body, in a body form. So the grafting that took place was not just a spiritual graft. Now it's both physical and spiritual. The things that they were not able to do in the Old Testament to show the people in the world that they were God's people, there was something that was interfering in their physical being that did not enable them to love unconditionally those who were outside the family. It just didn't seem to do it. Couldn't seem to happen. When Christ came and rose from the dead, now something's happened to us where we've been grafted not only spiritually but physically, so that now when we are out there, he changes us completely. Does that make sense? No, we still look the same, and so, if you're not attractive, but if you are, God bless you, right? Everyone here has been blessed by God. I can see that. But it's this thing where the transformation takes place in a way that now we are loving people that hate us. That's what God has commanded us to do, and we're able to do that now because of what Christ did for us in the resurrection. Now we are grafted, and because of Christ, he is both physical and spiritual now. Jesus currently is both physical and spiritual. Do you understand that? He has a resurrected body. So Jesus isn't some floating spirit. He's God in the flesh still today with a resurrected body, sitting at the right hand of God. No, he can spiritually present himself, but he can also physically present himself, right? We are going to have that same kind of body someday in the future, according to Scripture. But in the meantime, he's still changed us in a way, grafted us in, so that we have the ability. So nobody can say, I can't. The only reason why you're not loving the people who hate you is because you choose not to. And we don't believe God enough. We don't trust God enough to say, I am going to risk my own value, my own self-esteem, my own whatever, to love this person even though they can't stand me. You follow that? That's huge. We couldn't do it without Christ. We'd be like, you hate me? Okay. We get fights all the time. That's what. You look at the Old Testament, they're always fighting. They're not only fighting other nations, they're fighting each other constantly. And griping. Oh my gosh, were they griping. But now something is different in us through Christ. Anybody. It doesn't matter what your background, it doesn't matter what your ethnicity or whatever, nationality or any of those things. It doesn't matter. Actually, it never did, if you were willing to listen. But somehow in our humanity, our sin in the Old Testament, it just couldn't happen. And so now this new grafting has taken place. The New Testament says that Christ is the vine and we are the branches. So all that power, all of that energy, all of that ability that we have comes from Christ, comes from God. So we don't sit back and say, oh, I'm one of God's chosen people. Look at me. I am a Christian and I am amazing. No, it's not something you're proud of. It's humbling. Because what we do is we think of others more than ourselves. That's not normal. You see, God did something in us that transforms us from normal, from human, from selfish, to being selfless, for thinking of others more than ourselves, for putting others before us. I'll tell you, man, I don't know why it's so hard for me to do this when I'm driving. I don't know. There's something about, like, I'll walk in a big group of people, and someone will come in front of me, I'm like, oh, excuse me. I'm like super polite. I get in the car, and it's like, I just like I turn evil or something. It's like I don't know something about that vehicle that I'm just like, I'm screaming at them, honking. They're like, oh, sorry. It's like, yeah, I bet you're sorry. No, I'm not quite that bad, but I exaggerate slightly. But it's weird, right? There's something about certain situations where it like turns off. Sometimes it's when we're around certain people, the people that, and we're usually super nice, and now my tolerance is gone. And I have no tolerance. And you're going to get the real me, like 100%, right away. Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's neighbors, work, whatever it is. It's people, it's situations, it's if you're cutting out sugar and you really got a hankering for it, you become really annoying and irritable. Anyone on a diet, yeah, we know how that goes, right? whatever those things are. We have to go against what God has done in our lives to be selfish. We're going against our own spirit when we do those things. We've been grafted in so that we produce new fruit. If we're truly grafted in, we can't help but produce new fruit. Now, we can become, because of our unbelief, go from a Granny Smith or a great Granny Smith, or a Macintosh, or a Golden Delicious to a crab apple. Some of us do that occasionally, and it's because of our unbelief, God. So it doesn't stop us from still being an apple. It doesn't stop us from being Christian. It just stops us from understanding and being the delicious, rich fruit that we're supposed to be. Because what does the Bible say is the fruit of the Spirit? Anyone know that? Go ahead, Megan, show off. Excellent. You guys got that, right? Only reason why, yeah, right. Only reason why I remember that is because there's this dumb song that they used to sing at camp. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. All really good things. That's the fruit. It doesn't even say fruits, plural. It just says fruit. This is what happens when you're connected, grafted into the vine. It's unavoidable. Now, we don't always do it well. But if you have no desire for love and for joy and for peace and for patience and for kindness and for goodness and gentleness and self-control, if you have no desire for that, you're not grafted in. It's okay, but if you want that, just come to God, come to Jesus, He'll graft you in. And all of a sudden you're connected to the power source. Amen. Right? You're connected to it. And then it starts, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, like I didn't realize I could do that. It's like, because you couldn't on your own. Something that God did. And now Jesus is like, yeah. And then it's like, keep believing. Keep believing in that little scrawny pencil-sized branch that you started out with will begin to grow and thicken and continue to produce good fruit. And pretty soon there's this, bam, this rocking apple tree that everybody wants to come around and pick your fruit. That's where the illustration ends. I don't like, but it's like you're attractive. People are like, look at it, like this is what I want to be like that. Nobody, the only time in the Old Testament people wanted to be like the Hebrew people was when they beat them in war. And it's like, wow, your God is pretty impressive. Little David goes out there with a slingshot. Nails Goliath, this big, giant dude. He was like, I don't need the big sword. I don't need the big, all that stuff, man. I got God. See, he was connected. He was a branch that was growing, man, from the tree. He goes out there still, he just like show off, because all his brothers are like, yeah, whatever. And then they went over and they started beating on him. The Philistines are like, they start running away. Because it's like, holy, like if he can do that with a rock, what are these people capable of doing? Because they understood it wasn't, because they were cowering in fear. And it wasn't until David came out there and said, listen, this is because of God, the God I worship. I don't have to worry about you. And all of us, when we think about all of those Goliaths that are in our lives, all those things that are standing in front of us that look so huge and intimidating and frightening, and it's like and we historically have ran away from it to whatever it is that we feel protected by. Or we ran to that side and bowed the knee to it. God's like, no more. You're grafted into the branch, baby. You are one of us, and we are going to overcome. And we can do that by staying, by trusting, by believing, by staying connected to the tree. Because God said the only way you're going to end up becoming losing those branches and start losing the fruit and becoming a crabapple is if you stop trusting. Continued disbelief, it says there in Romans 11, has consequences. He's not saying, I'm going to give you one of these consequences, man, I'm going to bust you. No, it's like, no, the consequences is you're not going to be, you're not going to have all of that peace and joy and goodness that you could have when you're connected to God and trusting Him. It's like, man, the consequences are because you're not getting all those good things that you could be getting. Those are the consequences. And pretty soon, you're just going to be withered away. And you're going to get cut off or snapped off or broken off. It doesn't mean you're not a Christian. It doesn't mean you don't have God in your life. It just means that you are no longer being empowered by God. And at any moment, as Paul says, God could take that branch and plug you right back in. So it's never like too late. So even if you find yourself all withered up and broken and shattered inside, God's like, dude, just come on back. Honey, just come on back. I'll graft you back. And all that power, all that energy, all of that can be yours again. Just plug in. That's what we got to do. Stay plugged into the tree of life of God. All right, let's pray.